interested in the energy industry, I would actually encourage you to pick a tough engineering subject, just because I think it does provide a great foundation in terms of structural and analytical skills.
The Sharjah Research, Technology and Innovation Park, in cooperation with the Ministry of Education, has reached out to Enerwhere to host a webinar for students grade 9 to 12 to talk about renewable and sustainable energy, basically the industry, what jobs are like. And this vlog is a summary of the highlights of this webinar. Enjoy. I don't know how many of you sort of are aware of this pyramid that I'm going to show you now. So when I grew up also, everyone was talking about IQ. So there are all these IQ tests, etc., etc. So, and that's basically about having the technical hard skills and know-how. And this is what you predominantly learn at university. And this is the foundation. You need to get that right. And so for me, the GPA is important. I know that there are exceptions, right? I know that there are students out there that might have not the best GPA and would be a great fit for Enerwhere. But it is a selection tool. I cannot consider 100% of the graduates. I need to filter somehow. And GPA and how you're doing is a reflection what your technical skills and know-how are. So for me, this is important. It's really the foundation. You need to get that right, and over life, you probably will need to constantly adapt that and learn new things. So then
learn something and then demonstrate to future employers, to yourself, that you can work through something hard and become at least not an expert in your field, but good at something, then you can be immediately productive. That's not what I did. I graduated from high school without much of an understanding of the business world or even the options available to me. I didn't do a lot of research, and I ended up at a university that sounded cool and had a cool business program, but it was a very generalist program. So we spent 4 years learning about all kinds of things at minimal depth. And in that sense, when I graduated, I was probably about as clueless about the business world as when I entered the university. I got lucky. I had a really good high school. I was good at math, so I managed to get a job in a general consulting firm based on effectively my math and critical thinking skills. Now the good news is, let's say hypothetically you screw up your choice of studies. Number one, it's fixable. I personally considered switching to economics and actually ran business and economics at the same time for a while, which was basically purely math and statistics, which I guess did help to get me into the consulting firm in the end. So if you think that that you picked something that you absolutely hate and or that you're terrible at, I think it's worth, after you're reassessing and possibly switching, right? Much better to lose 1 year than to lose 4 or 5. Secondly, let's say you graduate and you haven't learned anything in your studies, you can still learn later. I started in consulting with 26 at what is in the end still one of the top 5 consulting firms, management consulting firms in the world, at A.T. Kearney. And over the next 3-4 years, I worked my butt off. Those were 18-hour days most of the time. But I learned from really great people, business skills, hands-on, and analytics that gave me the foundation to later start a company. So it is possible to catch up on that, but I think I wasted a lot of time in that process. And if you're interested in a technical subject, and if you're interested in the energy industry, I would actually encourage you to pick a tough engineering subject, just because I think it does provide a great foundation in terms of structural and analytical skills. there's a wide choice of subjects, obviously. So if you take a look at the company that we are today, the people with some of the highest value and the scarcest talents are the one that picked one subject and went deep. Electrical engineering is super helpful in the energy industry because nearly everything is going electric today. Whether you're in solar energy, in wind, or in batteries, electrical engineering is always required. Structural engineering is super helpful in some subjects, right? In wind, structure is actually probably 60% of the problem. In solar, it's 20% of the problem. So by going down a structural engineering path, you'll be more biased towards, let's say, wind. So yeah, electrical engineering I think is good. Mechanical engineering works. It's a bit more generalist. You could go wild and do something like aeronautics, right? If you think about wind, for example, wind turbine blades are really more about fluid dynamics than they are about many other things. And we're currently working on a project to use kites for wind generation. And then you're really building aircraft to produce electricity in the end. So there are many cool things, and I would encourage you to pick something that you actually truly like, because it'll make it'll make the long hours and the hard work a lot easier. But pick something and go a little bit deeper, and don't stay too general. That's, I think, the high level recommendation.
EQ became fashionable. So that's then the emotional intelligence. So by now this is also very standard, but I guess 20 years or so that became very fashionable. That's about communication skills, social skills, also things that Daniel spoke about more.
But by the time you're 40, most of the time you're not doing the same thing, or hopefully you're not doing the same thing that you were doing as a junior graduate at 25. You'll have graduated, you'll be assessing bigger problems, and half of the assessment is very quick cutting from, does it violate the laws of physics, does it violate any other laws, and does it make sense from a people perspective. In fact, that's one aspect that we haven't talked about much yet, is that in the end, success in life is sure about hard skills, but a lot more is about soft skills, right? You'll have to deal with people in pretty much any occupation. And as you will undoubtedly have found out in school, your grades are not 100% dependent on your performance on any particular subject. They are also directly impacted by how well you get along with a teacher. That is not a fluke. That is normal. That's going to be like that for the rest of your life. And unfortunately, in many occupations, how well you get along with your superiors, with your clients, or with your regulator is a much bigger determinant than all the other factors in how well you do. So working on social skills, building leadership skills, right? In the end, in the beginning, you have to drive yourself to perform well. Very quickly, if you do well, by the time you're 3-4 years in any occupation, you'll be leading a couple of young people to do something else. And then again, it's not about how well you do and how hard you work. It's about how hard you get the other guys to work.
And now, more recently, it's about the adaptability intelligence, in quotients. And this is about the lifelong learning and redefining your skills and career. And I believe that you guys will not pick one career and then stick with it for the rest of your life. I don't think you will have that luxury. Realistically, we don't know what the next 5 years will bring. If you go back 5 years ago, 2015, nobody would have forecasted where we are now and how the environment has changed, right? I mean, obviously the pandemic is a very extreme example, but these things happen periodically. In 2008, there was the financial crisis, and that changed the environment dramatically. I think we are obviously very biased, but I'm convinced that sustainability and environment, renewable energy is going to be critical for the next 10, 15 plus years, I'm convinced. But even within that industry, the skills requirements are going to change dramatically. And you, as an individual, you should want to be at the cutting edge of what you can provide to your employer. Because if you're not, you're competing in a very large pool of individuals that offer them sort of a commodity resource, and you're not going to be very successful or need to work for a low salary.
Apart from your study, I think there's a few other things that are truly helpful. And one of the most important ones is getting a feel for the real world. Again, I came from a background where my high school career was already long at 13 years, had another year afterwards, and then went into a study where I only ended up graduating at 25 or 26. So that's a very, very long time without practical, or it would have been a very long time with practical experience had I not worked in parallel to my studies in jobs that were somewhat related. I worked when I graduated from high school in an online stock brokerage company. I later worked at a bank and at a call center for Mercedes-Benz. But all of them at least gave me a taste for what real work life looks like, where your performance and your grading and your ultimately promotion cycle is not just dependent on your academic grades, but where real life randomness matters. And I think that did help later on. And let me maybe explain what I mean by that. In school, and to a certain extent in the early years of university, there is no capacity constraint. That means if you work hard and if you're really smart, you will get a good grade, and if you have the right social skills to deal with the right teachers, and you can manipulate a bit by picking the right teachers and the right professors. But there's really no constraint, right? If there's 10 good people in a class, you can get 10 good grades. The real world is very different. If you join as 10 fantastic young graduates in a company, the chance that you will all get promoted on the same schedule are zero. Because there is very, very little chance that that particular company has unlimited capacity and can promote everyone at the same time. And so the competitive element in many ways becomes a lot stronger as you enter the real workforce. And that's not just in terms of your jobs, the people that you compete with in the place that you work. The same applies in many other respects. At the company level, right? I started a young company, and most startups fail, and that's not only because of the skills of the founders or where you start or whatnot. That is because there is, in real life, there is a very, very large random factor. And if any one of you hasn't read The Black Swan from Nicholas Taleb, it's a very painful book to read, but it has a couple of very important lessons. Namely, that just because things look right, that you're doing the right things, you have to account for random variation. And in Enerwhere, this became obvious when we started pitching to our first clients. When you started pitching a brand new product to clients that have never heard about it and that mostly think that it's a ludicrous idea, your hit rate is extremely low, single-digit percentages. And you pitch to 100 people and 95% of people say, no, that's absolutely terrible. And you think that's all you, but it's actually probably close to real life. With really hard work and smart strategy, you can bring up that number, maybe from 5% to 10% or even to 15 or 20. But it is still, on any given opportunity, more a crapshoot, more the dice or the dart that determine the fate of a particular outcome than your skills. And knowing that up front, I think, can prevent a lot of frustration without changing, while still encouraging the right behavior. Like I said, going from a 5 to a 10% probability is a dramatic step up. It still means you still need to do the same thing 10 times. And actually, if you run a Monte Carlo situation, you could get just unlucky and have a couple of unlucky hits in a row. So you probably still need to do the same thing 20 or 30 times to get a hit. And frustratingly enough, for some of you, even if you're all fantastic students, you're really smart, you really work hard, some of you will get a hit on the first try, and some of you will have to try 20 times until they get the first hit, even if you have the exact same skills, smarts, and work hours. If you're in the lucky group to get a hit on the first try, just don't believe that this is down to you, right? You got bloody lucky, enjoy it, but don't believe that this will happen again. You might get lucky once or twice, but over the course of your career, probably not. And if you get unlucky, just keep going. Make sure that you're doing the right things, but over time, this evens out. Looking back now on nearly 20 years in business, there's always been large variation, right? Sometimes you were early on, you got something right the first time. Sometimes it took forever, but over a lifetime, hard work, making smart decisions, picking the right people to work with, including the right professors to learn from, does add up, and individual randomness evens out. So don't get too frustrated if things go wrong once. Don't celebrate too much if you get lucky early on, but pick something that you're good at, that you like, and work hard. I'm pretty confident that if you do those things, you'll get somewhere. It's not to say that sometimes there aren't very, very tough decisions, because information is, you never have enough information on the big decisions in life, whether that's picking a partner, deciding when you have kids, which job to take, whether to take a job in another location, or even which university to pick. There's always imperfect information. But yeah, having the confidence that some of those decisions can be corrected later, I think helps a lot on that.
Every company has its unique culture, but at Enerwhere, for example, critical thinking is paramount.
When something violates the laws of physics, it's very unlikely to work, right? People come to me all the time with data. They say, I have the following piece of equipment that does this. And I'm like, look, that's theoretically possible, but if you produce more solar energy from a panel than you have solar energy hitting the panel in the first place, you might just want to check your spreadsheet, right? And these kind of very, very basics don't actually require college. 80% of my day-to-day problems in the energy industry, I can successfully assess whether it makes sense or not using 9th grade physics. The issue that you have in many places in the world, but to a certain extent in some of the education systems here, that you get a set curriculum and say do this, and you go through that curriculum, you get marks, sometimes even very good marks, but whether or not what you're being taught and what you're doing there makes sense in the real world is very hard to assess early on. So, and the same happens when you go into business, right? There are obvious paths, you can follow them, but whether that will lead to the ultimate right outcome is hard to assess. So asking, what are we really doing here, is very important. That's the critical thinking, right? Challenging the information that is in front of you and the orders that you're given is really comfortable, right? It's mostly much more comfortable to just go with a given path and follow orders or answer the question that was asked. But unfortunately, many times the question that's asked is simply not the right one, and that can get you into big trouble. So what we value as a young company that is breaking into a sector where things have been done the same way for 30 or 40 years, and where we have the belief that things should be done differently, is we constantly challenge assumptions. We use data, we're very data driven, so we try to collect real data, not secondary or tertiary sources, but real ground truth, and we use that data to challenge assumptions and build hypotheses for what could be a different scenario outcome. like I mentioned, most of the time that's hard because people tell you do this, and you're like, wait a minute, does that really make sense? But you have to challenge not only sometimes the person who's asking, but even conventional industry wisdom or whatnot, and that requires, and that doesn't always go well, right? Most of the time, particularly when you're very young, you'll be told, dude, I don't care, just do as you're told. So it requires trying over and over without giving up, and that's really grit, right? Grit is the ability to keep going when the going gets tough, and it's this trying again when things are not easy, and challenging the questions that tends to lead to breakout outcomes. And many of the greatest companies on this planet today were founded by people who did it exactly that, right? They looked at something that had been done in exactly the same way for a long time. They explored real data to say, can this be done differently? And then they just worked really, really hard, sometimes for decades. Tesla is very well known. Elon Musk is very well known for saying nobody changed the world in 40 hours per week, right? He personally believes that 80 hours per week is kind of the minimum.
I can tell you what we do as a company, and that does not apply necessarily to all renewable and sustainable energy companies. So what we do, we typically have 2 interviews or more, but at least one sort of where it's more general questions, and I have these principal conversations where I want to see that the person shows genuine interest, critical thinking, etc., and also about the communication skills and how the individual sells themselves and the motivation. And then typically the second interview is a technical interview, and there we have also different levels of technical interviews. So depending on what the internship is for, or I mean, beyond that, if it's for a full-time role, the interviews get more and more difficult. For some of the opportunities, it's then also that we ask them to do case studies or some work where we give them an exercise that they need to try to complete.
I think read more, look into the magazines that are specialized in the field that you are interested in knowing, and there are plenty of magazines. Read the local news as well, that are specifically in the field of energy. I think reading, and sometimes I use YouTube as well to learn a new skill or to learn something new. So I think the best advice is reading. Read as much as possible.
If I have an interviewee that doesn't know anything about Enerwhere, that's already a big issue for me.
Yeah, read about the company you are going to, read about the person you're going to meet. These kind of things shows that you've done some work, so you are motivated, you are excited for it. I think as a fresh graduate, it's okay to start with internship. Do not expect a job waiting. I started with an internship myself. So, and during the internship, I think this is after the interview, ask as many questions as possible, learn as much as possible, take advantage of the experienced people around you. That's how you grow. Just in case that there is no job opportunity down the line, at least you kind of absorb as much as possible. I think be prepared in terms of technical knowledge.
So this is also, I think, a very good point that Sara has made, and this is one thing that I was always very critical about all the interns during the interviews, and I think I was quite forgiving that a lot of the students here in the Middle East, and this is, I think they're younger, they to a degree grow up a little bit protected, but they focus on their study and don't think or look outside of the box. So we have had plenty of applicants here for internships, pretty much all of them, when I asked them about Shams Dubai, which is the initiative in Dubai for on-grid solar, which is the only one in the UAE, they didn't know about it. And if you study sustainable and renewable energy, and if you want to do an internship with a renewable energy company, and you don't know about the initiative that sort of allows the renewable and sustainable energy companies to work here, that's a bit of an issue. Or if you ask them about the solar parks that are being built here in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, which are amongst the leading in the world, which have world record-breaking low prices per kilowatt hour, which is amazing. None of them, or hardly any of them, knew about it. So you need to think beyond just what you're learning at school or at university, how this relates to business, and you need to be excited about what you're studying and read about it in the news and think about the so what does that mean. If you should sort of look at, okay, what are the different technologies that Sara spoke about PV solar and concentrated solar, and why is concentrated solar so much more expensive, and why is Dubai still building concentrated solar? And you should then understand, well, the benefits of concentrated solar is that there is already integrated storage. But all of these things, yes, so I think the internships, they can help you start getting these ideas what you should think about. But it's also, you should be proactive about it.
I totally agree with you, Stefan. And if you think people would be very lenient with you because you just graduated, that's a wrong perception. I remember, and I will never forget my interview with Stefan. It was 2 hours long, and he asked me about every single thing you can think about, and it was really, really like filtration, because he was very frustrated as well from the amount of from the lack of knowledge we had, and I totally agree and understand it. And I started to become frustrated like him when I started interviewing people, because these things are everywhere in the media, so there's no excuse for us to not know it. I will be mainly talking about why did I study sustainable and renewable energy engineering, and then how did I manage to work in the industry, and what are the topics that I have studied, and then we can also, if you have questions, that would be great. I hope you all are hearing me clearly and my voice is not far away, so that would be great if someone can confirm it. So I am a University of Sharjah graduate. I graduated in 2016, and it's funny how I got into engineering, because most of my family are already engineers and my mother didn't want me to become an engineer. I think this is something very common in Middle East, that the kids are either doctors or engineers. So I wanted to study medicine, and I applied for medicine, but I didn't get through, and I get into sustainable and energy engineering, to be honest, quite as a coincidence, because the major back then was closed, it was full, everyone wanted to study sustainability, and I was like, okay, fine, but they gave me an exception because I already applied for medicine and it didn't get through. So back then in 2012, having a bachelor degree in renewable energy engineering wasn't very common, and we have seen that the Middle East and UAE specifically are having some direction into sustainability. They were already discussing a nuclear power plant, and they were already having some major projects coming up. So it was the future in Middle East. It's already existing in Europe and many other countries, but in Middle East it was coming up. So I was like, why not? In sustainable and renewable energy engineering, for me, it looks like it's the future, and we definitely, as the new generation, we should look into saving the environment and keeping it cleaner and much more sustainable. So I studied sustainability, which was a combination of more of electrical and some mechanical engineering, which was interesting for me and challenging sometimes. I completed my studies in 4 years, which is the typical bachelor degree duration in the UAE, and I had the opportunity to explore energy outside UAE through an internship where I did it in Germany, and that was like, you know, the thing that made me realize that what I'm doing is the right thing. I graduated with this degree in 2016, and that's when I joined Enerwhere. In 2016, there weren't many opportunities in the renewable energy engineering in the market. Enerwhere was already there in the field since 2012, so I had a chance to have an internship with them, and then I took it from there. I started from a design engineer, the basic, very junior tasks, and I grew up within 4 years to become a project manager and leading my own opportunities until it's completed and implemented. This is maybe briefly about how did I get into the field and how did I join Enerwhere. Fatima is asking, did you face any difficulty and what are they? With any major there is difficulties, in any field there are difficulties. In the beginning, maybe taking it back to 2012 is the biggest difficulty that I didn't want to study engineering, and it wasn't like even my second option. My only option was studying medicine. So that was the first hit I got, but then I got involved in the engineering, and because math and physics wasn't a problem, but I didn't really want to study it. So that was the first difficulty. Second difficulty was when I reached the third year, when you need to do your internship. I had multiple options here to do the internship, but they weren't in the field of renewable. It was mainly more of administrative and management work, where you kind of be assistant manager or something like that. And there was probably 3 or 4 opportunities, and all of you as a student had these chances here. So I wanted, by that time, I wanted to do something outside. So finding an opportunity, an internship, a paid internship outside UAE was a challenge. And you can overcome it because there are multiple international student associations that will do the internship program for you, so that's fine. Or it's more of exchange program. That's how what I got involved in. The third difficulty, finding a job in the field. The market wasn't still opening up. Even the solar companies weren't that many, and joining companies at that time, getting hired was really low, the percentage, because there weren't many projects. People were still kind of hesitant to install solar energy on the roofs. They didn't understand the math and what's going on behind it, how it's viable. So there were many uncertainties, and first year I remember it was more of the business development managers in Enerwhere were more of educating people about renewable energy, solar energy, how does it work, and then gaining their trust. So for companies that are startups and you don't have many incoming projects, it's kind of a challenge for them to keep their resources. So that was one of the difficulties, but we overcome it, and now we have more than 8 years of experience in the field. I've been working with them for 4 years so far, since I joined, so it was fine. In the field, I see that there are many female engineers here. In the field, it's kind of you need to work really hard to prove yourself. And if you are in a site and the site has like 15-meter ladder, everyone is expecting you that you will not climb it because you're a female, but you need to climb it. So that was one of the challenges, that we are all treated in a nice way, and they are like soft with us. That's good, but sometimes it's also people underestimate your abilities and your work motivation. So that was one of the difficulties, but in Enerwhere I overcome it because they are empowering women, and it wasn't really difficult within the company. But outside the company, when you meet people and clients, they would have that perception, and it's fine. Once they know that you're strong and you're capable, they actually accept it. So that was one of the interesting challenges going on in challenging. I think being patient as a young engineer was difficult, because we really like things to happen very fast, but that's not in the industry. An opportunity can take up to 6 months until you close it, or sometimes 1 year, and sometimes 2 or 3 months. So you have to be patient, and you have to be very open-minded to any type of questions. You can meet someone who has many years of experience in his field, but when it comes to solar, you shouldn't be surprised if they don't know anything at all, or really little knowledge. So you have to educate people, and you have to be very patient. Sometimes you have to spoon feed, and I think that's fine, because if they start talking about their field of expertise, I wouldn't know much, so that's okay. So you need to really know and be knowledgeable about everything related to the things that you are approaching to the client, and whatever you're pitching is basically, you should know what you're talking about. Sometimes you get really difficult technical questions that makes you think twice and 3 times, but that's okay. It's a learning process for everyone. So you always need to read more, learn more about the technologies, so that you are ahead of your competitions. I think if I would give any advices, it would start with myself. I should have used my time even further, and when I was a student, because I know all of you might think, oh no, we don't have time, we have exams, we have quizzes, we have assignments we need to submit. But believe me, when you are a student, you have plenty of time, and take the chance to do internships, as many as possible. You need to stand out. Having the grades, this is something probably me and Stefan always have a different opinion. For me, I really don't care about the grades that much, because sometimes things happen during the studies, but I really would, if I interview someone, I would look into what they did in their summer vacation. Taking myself as an example, I wouldn't give this advice if I didn't do it myself. Starting from year 1, I did internships, whether it is in a school or whether it is in a site offices. I took the chances and went to the exhibitions and asked for internships. And any internship during your bachelor degree is a great skill, and it adds a huge value to your resume. Yeah, first of all, because it's engineering, it would be heavily based on math and physics. So we had many courses in math. I think, if I remember correctly, that was 4 years ago. We had 6 courses in math, and of course physics we had multiple, and Physics 1, Physics 2, that was in year 1, which is common between all the engineering. So first year was the same for all engineering majors. Another, the things that were more specifically oriented on renewable energy was solar courses. There were solar thermal, there was energy storage, there were other solar courses that I don't really recall right now. We studied statistics, we studied engineering probabilities, we studied programming, and that's basically learning C++ language, which didn't turn out very useful for me right now in my career. We studied wind energy, and it was only one course. If I would actually think about the courses, I wish if there were more wind courses, because our knowledge in the wind energy is extremely limited. Now there are electives, which is basically extra courses that you take to fulfill your curriculum, and it really varies. Some people takes management, some people takes something in the energy field, solar. Some people will take thermal, some people will take bio, and it really depends on their let's say interest. For me, I knew from the beginning I would like to be specialized more in the solar, so I took even my electives in the solar field. So I took advantage, and most of my courses are in the solar. Engineering management was a very useful course, because we studied how to do timelines and how to do measurements of getting a product until the like from developing it until the production line, and it really varies on how the professor sees the course, Stefan. Some professors would really focus on the math more than the practical aspect of that course, and some professors would be doing it based on their practical experience, which was, for me, I think that was more useful than learning the integration of some theory.
Renewable and sustainable energy can be very geographic specific. So if you work in solar, that's great here for this region. It might not work so well in Scotland. If you work in hydropower, this place is not the best places to work in, right? So, and probably I suspect also the universities here are not the best ones suited to educate you in hydropower. Sara, you spoke briefly about wind power, and you said that it's a shame, and that's where our opinion might again also differ, right? You say that it's a shame that you didn't have more of a chance to learn about wind power. And I agree that might be interesting from an intellectual point of view for the students. Wind power on a commercial or as a business here in the UAE is just non-existent, right? And you have some wind power opportunities in Saudi, but like the example with Scotland, wind power is great there, or the North Sea, or there are other places. So if you go into, also in the future, storage is going to play a huge role in the renewable and sustainable energy industry. So if you are extremely skilled in storage, so battery technologies and the likes, there will be good opportunities.
I totally agree with you. You really need to think about where do you want to work. So if you want to work in Middle East, mainly the main energy source would be solar. But wind energy, maybe it's, again, as you mentioned, it's something for me as a person. I really wanted to learn more, because it was more of mechanic, and it was really heavy engineering. So I wanted to learn the full scope of wind. not for career purposes, just for personal purposes. That's it. Yeah, I totally agree. You really need to think about where are you staying and what kind of field is around you.